The cacophony of the late-night kitchen, clanging pots, sizzling oil, shouted orders, abruptly shattered. Manager Thompson's voice, sharp as a chef's knife, sliced through the din. "Someone stole from the register, and Kai, I'm looking at you." Young Kai Chen froze, his eyes wide with terror, a stammered denial dying on his lips. Behind the swinging door, in the steamy, cramped scullery of the Daily Grind diner, Arthur Vance worked his familiar rhythm. For 15 years, the hiss of the sprayer and the clatter of ceramic had been the soundtrack to his life. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with a quiet efficiency, clearing mountains of grease-stained plates. Arthur was a man of few words, his observations his loudest statements. He'd watched Kai, barely out of school, join the kitchen crew a few months ago. A timid, anxious boy, often fumbling, always apologetic. Arthur knew the kid worked harder than anyone, trying to escape the same grimy underbelly of life Arthur still inhabited. He was no thief. Arthur's gaze lingered on the office door where Thompson had dragged Kai. He could hear Thompson's agitated voice, muffled but clear enough. $200, gone! And you, with your shifty eyes and always looking over your shoulder, brand new, barely here a month, and suddenly cash is missing? Arthur's jaw tightened. He knew Kai was nervous, yes, but it wasn't the nervousness of guilt. It was the raw, exposed fear of someone desperate not to make a mistake, desperate to keep this low-paying job. Thompson's accusation was flimsy, based on nothing but prejudice and the manager's own impatience. He was condemning a boy before a single question of real substance had been asked. The back office was a cramped, airless box, smelling of old coffee and desperation. Manager Thompson, his face a mottled red, leaned over Kai Chen, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Where is it, Kai? Don't play dumb with me. That money isn't just going to sprout legs and walk out of the register." Kai, shoulders hunched, looked like a small bird caught in a storm. His hands trembled, picking at a loose thread on his apron. I don't know, sir. I didn't see anything. I was just cleaning." His voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to Thompson's rising fury. Thompson's finger jabbed the air, inches from Kai's face. "Cleaning, huh? Or pocketing? You're new, boy, and you're nervous. That screams guilty to me." Arthur, hidden just outside the open door, felt his own hands clench into fists. The injustice of it was a bitter taste. Arthur's breath hitched. He wasn't one for heroics. His life was a quiet rotation of steam, grease, and the clatter of plates. But the manager's words, his cruel certainty, struck a chord deep within Arthur. He'd seen enough unfairness in his years, enough quiet suffering. He remembered his own father, a man who always said, "Silence in the face of wrong is the loudest lie." The thought was a cold, clear stream cutting through his hesitation. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant risking the meager stability he clung to. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Arthur pushed the door open, the faint squeak echoing in the tense silence. Thompson spun around, startled, his face contorting further at the sight of Arthur. "Vance, what do you want? This is private!" Arthur stepped fully into the room. His presence, though quiet, seemed to fill the small space. His voice was calm, a steady counterpoint to Thompson's agitation. "With respect, sir, I heard." "And I believe you're mistaken about Kai," Thompson scoffed. "Oh, you do you? And I suppose you know more than I do about my own register?" Arthur met his gaze evenly. "I know Kai spent the entire afternoon scrubbing out the walk-in, the one you said was good enough for weeks. He didn't come near the front register after lunch. And when I saw him, he was still wearing the same grimy gloves from the freezer. Not exactly subtle if he just lifted cash." Kai looked up, wide-eyed, a flicker of stunned gratitude in his fearful gaze. Thompson's face, already red, deepened to a furious crimson. Thompson's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Are you calling me incompetent, Vance? Questioning my judgment in my own restaurant?" Arthur remained silent, his gaze unwavering. That was enough for Thompson. He jabbed a finger, not at Kai, but at Arthur. "That's it. Insubordination. Get out, Vance. You're fired. Get your things, and don't come back." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Arthur felt a cold dread, but surprisingly, no regret. He simply nodded, a quiet dignity in his posture. He slowly untied his grease-stained apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the small, cluttered desk. Kai watched, horrified, a whispered, choked apology escaping his lips. Arthur offered him a small, reassuring nod, then turned and walked out, leaving the fate of both men hanging in the balance. The cold, empty silence of his small apartment felt different tonight. Not just the usual hum of loneliness, but the stark echo of a life upended. Arthur Vance sat in the dim light, the worn fabric of his armchair offering little comfort against the chill that seemed to seep into his bones. The weight of unemployment was a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders, a heavy cloak of uncertainty. He stared into the dark, the faint glow of a street lamp painting weak patterns on the wall, and knew the sting of injustice. Manager Thompson's furious words still echoed, raw and unfair. But as the first pale hint of dawn touched the window pane, illuminating his worn wallet on the table, Arthur felt no regret. A quiet dignity settled over him. He had spoken the truth, he had done what was right, and in that, he found a solitary, steadfast peace. The early morning air outside the diner was crisp, carrying the faint scent of melting snow. Kai Chen, his eyes still red-rimmed and his shoulders slumped, approached Arthur as he gathered his few belongings from a locker. "Arthur," Kai whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what to say. You saved me, and now because of me." His voice trailed off, guilt heavy in the air. Arthur, despite his own weariness, offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "You did nothing wrong, son. I did what anyone should have done." He placed a hand on Kai's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort. Kai looked up, tears brimming. "I won't forget this, Arthur. I promise." It was a heartfelt, if vague, vow. Then, with a final, grateful nod, Kai turned and disappeared into the morning mist, a vulnerable silhouette against the awakening city. The days that followed blurred into weeks, then months. Arthur moved from one low-wage job to another, a quiet ghost in a succession of new aprons. He washed dishes in a bustling downtown diner, scrubbed floors in a factory cafeteria, and for a short time even peeled potatoes in a bustling hotel kitchen. Each new manager gave him the same wary glance, a silent question in their eyes, before assigning him the most menial tasks. He faced rejections with a nod, accepted the meager pay with a quiet grace. His hands, once strong and steady, grew more gnarled, but his work ethic remained unwavering. He was a man of routine and quiet competence, finding dignity in the honest toil no matter how overlooked. The world was cold, but Arthur's resolve was a steady flame. 15 winters had etched new lines around Arthur's eyes, silvered his temples, and deepened the quiet wisdom in his gaze. He sat in his familiar, sparsely furnished apartment, the same worn armchair, the same old television flickering with muted light. The years had passed in a steady, unremarked rhythm of work and quiet evenings. Sometimes, on a particularly cold night, a memory would surface. A young, terrified Kai, a whispered promise. He'd wonder, briefly, where the boy had gone, if he'd found his footing. But Arthur never lingered on such thoughts. His life was humble, a stark contrast to what it might have been, but it was his. There was no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance, a man content with the path his principles had forged. Arthur Vance moved with the quiet grace of a man who had perfected his craft over decades, even if that craft was flipping eggs and washing dishes in a greasy spoon. The aroma of sizzling bacon and stale coffee hung heavy in the air of the Morning Star, a diner far less grand than its name suggested. Mid-morning, the usual rush had dwindled to a few regulars. Arthur slid a plate of pancakes across the worn counter to Mrs. Henderson, her smile a familiar comfort. "Morning, Arthur. You look tired." He offered a small, tired smile in return. "Just another day, Mrs. Henderson." His hands, scarred and calloused, worked with practiced efficiency, each motion a testament to a life spent in service, dignified in its humility. Sunlight, weak and watery, struggled through the grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Later that afternoon, during a rare lull, Arthur retreated to the diner's cramped, dimly lit break room. The small television, perched precariously on a stack of old milk crates, flickered with a local news report. A young coworker, sweeping crumbs from the floor, barely glanced at the screen. But Arthur, unwrapping his meager sandwich, paused. The reporter was gushing about a rising culinary star, a local boy who had just opened his 5th high-end establishment. The camera zoomed in on a man in a crisp chef's jacket, his smile confident, his eyes bright with success. Kai Chen. Arthur's breath hitched. Time had sculpted the boy's anxious features into a man of undeniable presence. But those eyes, that subtle tilt of the head, it was him. A flicker of surprise, then a slow, deep warmth spread through Arthur's chest. A quiet pride blooming in the dusty room. That evening, in the familiar quiet of his small apartment, the image of Kai Chen on the television played in Arthur's mind. He sat by the window, the city lights a distant, shimmering tapestry. He remembered the terrified, stammering young man, cornered and falsely accused. He remembered the heat of his own anger, the cold resolve to speak up. He hadn't thought about Kai much in recent years, not actively, but the memory had been a quiet ember in his heart. Now, seeing Kai's triumph, there was no sting of envy, no regret for his own unchanging path, only a profound, humble satisfaction. A quiet certainty that some seeds, once planted, truly blossom, even if the gardener never sees the fruit. Arthur offered a faint, peaceful smile to the darkness beyond his window. A few days later, the quiet peace Arthur had found was disturbed by the diner owner's hushed lament. "Business is slow, Arthur. Real slow." Mr. Henderson, a man whose shoulders seemed permanently slumped under the weight of worry, wrung his hands. Another coffee shop opened down the street, and the bakery across the way, they're putting up a for-lease sign. Arthur listened, wiping down the already clean counter, the rag moving slower than usual. He knew what this meant. His job, his steady, if meager, livelihood, was once again precarious. The familiar scent of stale grease and fading hope hung heavier in the air than ever before. The stage was set, though Arthur didn't know it, for a different kind of arrival. It was a dreary, rain-soaked Thursday, the kind that promised an early night and little cheer. Arthur Vance, his back aching from another long shift, was wiping down the counter of the struggling diner, the Morning Star. Just before closing, the rain streaked the front window, blurring the already dim streetlights. His eyes, tired but ever watchful, caught a flicker of something utterly out of place. A sleek black luxury car, a modern marvel of engineering, glided silently to a halt, directly outside the diner's worn facade. It was a Bentley, Arthur thought, a vehicle that belonged on pristine city boulevards, not parked amidst the puddles and peeling paint of their forgotten corner. The cook, a man named Sal, who'd seen almost as many years as Arthur, peered over his shoulder. "What in the world?" he muttered, wiping his hands on his apron. The driver, impeccably suited, stepped out, opened the back door with a crisp movement, and held it. The air crackled with an unspoken question. From the luxury car emerged a young man in his late 20s, tall and composed, his dark suit tailored to perfection. He exuded an air of quiet confidence, his presence a stark contrast to the diner's chipped formica and lingering smell of stale coffee. He scanned the nearly empty room, his gaze purposeful, yet Arthur found no flicker of recognition. The diner owner, a nervous woman named Betty, smoothed her apron and stepped forward, a hesitant smile on her face. "Welcome, sir. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. The young man offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod to Betty, his eyes continuing their search. Arthur, leaning against the counter with the dishcloth still in hand, felt a strange pull, a sense that this wasn't a casual visit. He watched, wiping his hands slowly, a quiet observer of this unexpected intrusion into their humble world. Then the young man's eyes, sharp and intelligent, finally settled on Arthur. A warm, genuine smile, one that seemed to chase away the last 15 years, spread across his face. He walked directly toward Arthur, his confident stride covering the distance in just a few steps. Arthur watched him approach, a faint memory stirring at the edges of his mind, a fleeting image of a younger, terrified face, but it wouldn't solidify. The young man stopped before him, extending a hand that was both firm and gentle. "Arthur," he said, his voice deep and resonant, yet with an unmistakable echo of familiarity. "It's Kai. Do you remember me?" Arthur's heart, a steady drum for so many years, seemed to skip a beat, then pound with sudden force. The name, the eyes, the warmth. It all clicked. The timid kitchen hand, the boy he'd defended, was standing before him, transformed. Arthur could only nod. A choked gasp caught in his throat. Kai gently led his stunned Arthur to a quiet booth in the back. Away from the curious stares of Betty and Sal, Arthur sat, still trying to reconcile the successful, confident man with the scared young man he remembered. Kai began to speak, his voice filled with a profound gratitude that touched Arthur's very soul. "That day, Arthur," Kai started, his gaze unwavering, "when you spoke up. Thompson was proven wrong, of course. The money was found. But that wasn't the point. You didn't just save my job, Arthur. You saved Termy. You gave me courage, the belief that someone, somewhere, cared enough to stand for truth." He recounted his journey, from a small culinary school he'd enrolled in with newfound determination, to the grueling years of building his first restaurant, then his second, and now an entire empire. "Your act, Arthur," Kai concluded, his voice soft but firm. "It was the catalyst. Everything I have, everything I am, started with your kindness." Arthur listened, tears pricking his eyes, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. Kai leaned forward, his expression serious but infused with the same warmth that had defined his smile. "Arthur, you gave me a life," he stated, the words hanging in the quiet diner air. "Now I want to give you yours back." Arthur's breath hitched. He had never expected anything, never sought a reward. His act had been one of simple principle. But Kai's earnestness, his conviction, was undeniable. Kai reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek, leather-bound folder. He didn't open it yet, letting the anticipation build. "I've built something, Arthur," he continued. "Something I want you to be a fundamental part of. Something you built, in a way. A position that reflects the integrity, the wisdom, and the quiet strength I've always remembered in you." Arthur could only stare, his eyes wide, his mind reeling from the sheer impossibility of what Kai was hinting at. Kai leaned forward across the diner booth table, a sleek, leather-bound folder appearing in his hand as if from thin air. "Arthur," he said, his voice firm but radiating warmth. "You gave me a life. Now I want to give you yours back." Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He watched, mesmerized, as Kai opened the folder, revealing documents filled with corporate logos and official-looking seals. "I'm offering you the position of head of operations for the entire Chen restaurant group." Arthur's mind reeled. Head of operations? For an asterisk entire group of high-end restaurants? He, Arthur Vance, the dishwasher, the humble cook of struggling diners. Kai continued, detailing a generous salary, comprehensive benefits, and the deed to a fully paid-for apartment, a place of his own, in a building with a view of the city lights. Arthur's hands, calloused and worn from decades of labor, began to tremble. He could barely stammer a question, his eyes wide with disbelief, a joyful shock blooming in his chest. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down Arthur's face. He didn't try to stop them. The magnitude of the offer, the sheer, unasked-for grace of it was too much to bear in silence. From the counter, the diner owner, a kind woman who had overheard Kai's booming words, started to clap softly. Then the cook, who'd worked beside Arthur for years, wrapped an arm around his shoulders, his eyes glistening. One by one, the few customers scattered through the diner joined in. A quiet, heartfelt ripple of applause, spreading through the small space. Arthur, choked with emotion, could only nod. A silent, profound yes to the miracle unfolding before him. Kai smiled, a deep, genuine smile, and gently squeezed Arthur's hand. Dusk had settled, painting the rainy streets in shades of indigo and silver, as Arthur stepped out of the diner for the last time. He wore a borrowed raincoat, his old apron folded neatly inside a plastic bag, He slid into the passenger seat of Kai's gleaming car, the plush leather a stark contrast to the worn plastic of his usual bus seat. As Kai pulled away from the curb, Arthur looked back at the small, neon-lit diner. A wave of nostalgia, tinged with profound gratitude, washed over him. The humble place, which had been his world for so long, receded into the blurring rain. He felt the smooth hum of the engine, the quiet promise of a new life stretching out before him, and for the first time in a very long time, the future felt boundless. A week later, Arthur stood in his new apartment. A spacious, sunlit haven with gleaming hardwood floors and a view of the city skyline. It still felt unreal, like a dream he might wake from. On a polished marble counter, he found a small, elegant card. It was from Kai. Arthur opened it, his hands still feeling a tremor of disbelief. The message was simple, yet profound. Arthur, your integrity saved me more than just a job that day. It saved my spirit. You taught me the true meaning of loyalty. It is my greatest honor to provide you with the future you always deserved. Welcome home, Kai. Tears welled in Arthur's eyes again, a silent, overwhelming validation of every choice he had ever made. Months later, Arthur Vance, now impeccably dressed in a sharp suit, sat at a large desk in his new office. Below him, through a panoramic window, a bustling, successful Kai-Chen restaurant hummed with vibrant energy. He watched the organized chaos of the kitchen, the efficient ballet of the waitstaff, a confident but humble smile playing on his lips. The journey had been long, marked by sacrifice and quiet dignity. But looking out at the empire he now helped to oversee, a profound sense of peace settled over him. Integrity, he knew, truly paid off, echoing across lifetimes, a silent ripple that could change everything.